perusahaan unicorn di Asia Tenggara berasal dari negara kepulauan terbesar ini. Sejak pandemi COVID-19, perkembangan teknologi digital semakin meningkat di berbagai sektor. Penutupan sekolah dan berbagai pusat aktivitas membuat sebagian besar masyarakat menjadi sangat tergantung pada teknologi untuk meneruskan kegiatan dari rumah. Hal ini membuka kesempatan ekonomi digital bagi mereka yang mampu beradaptasi. Jika perkembangan ini bisa terjadi secara inklusif, maka akan ada dampak yang lebih baik bagi kesejahteraan ekonomi di Indonesia. Namun, dalam setiap perubahan selalu ada tantangan. Mari kita dengar pengalaman mereka yang sudah fasih menggunakan teknologi digital dan dapat mengatasi perubahan sejak pandemi.
Oke, nama saya Ferdi. Saya seorang guru fisika di sebuah SMA swasta di Tangerang. Saya punya seorang istri, ya, Tirsa, dan satu anak. Ya. Istri saya ibu rumah tangga dan sedang merintis usaha online kecil-kecilan di bidang kuliner. Semuanya berubah ya. Kalau dulu kan kita mengajar di depan kelas ya, kita pakai papan tulis, anak-anak dilarang menggunakan HP ya. Kalau sekarang justru didorong untuk menggunakan HP, menggunakan laptop dan sebagainya.
Kalau di bidang usahaku sangat meningkat karena kayaknya orang benar-benar butuh untuk beli lauk, terus cemilan di rumah. Banyak juga yang membutuhkan untuk teman-teman yang memang lagi isoman dan segala macam. Banyak sih ya, maksudnya manfaatnya yang bisa aku sendiri sebagai ibu rumah tangga untuk dapatkan gitu.
Di awal-awal ya kendala tentang jaringan ya, jadi internet rumah kami kalau nonton streaming gitu ya masih kuat lah ya, tetapi sekarang kan tiba-tiba dipakai ya untuk pertemuan online karena saya mengajar, anak saya juga belajar di rumah begitu. Waktu kami berdua online gitu ada lonjakan bandwidth yang kepakai. Jadi kadang-kadang wifi kami nggak kuat gitu ya, langsung down gitu.
Kalau saya sendiri kan memang online itu lebih kepada untuk pesan ekspedisi, untuk nganterin barang-barang. Lalu ya itu sih sistem cash on delivery ini atau yang kita sering sebut dengan COD itu memang nggak menjamin 100% keamanan dan kepercayaan. Saya punya prinsip, hari gini pakai COD gitu ya. Maksudnya sebagai penjual pun punya hak untuk tidak percaya gitu kepada pembeli-pembeli yang tidak saya kenal gitu kan.
Beberapa daerah di sini itu jaringan selulernya kurang baik. Jadi ada beberapa tempat yang misalnya provider ini yang baik, provider yang gantung daerahnya. Saya melihat dari murid-murid saya ada yang begitu gitu ya. Kalau provider itu down ya sudah selesai lah, dia nggak bisa ikut pelajaran online seperti itu.
Faktor-faktor pendukung e-commerce seperti kualitas internet, kepercayaan akan pembayaran digital, dan logistik harus ditingkatkan jika kita ingin ekonomi digital di Indonesia berkembang ke arah yang lebih baik. Tapi tunggu sebentar. Coba kita lihat dari kacamata yang lebih besar. Nyatanya, belum semua orang menerima dampak baik kemajuan teknologi ini. Sebagian besar masyarakat Indonesia masih belum terkoneksi karena akses digital yang belum merata dan terjangkau. Sebagian lain yang sudah terkoneksi masih belum dapat mengambil manfaat dari teknologi karena rendahnya kapabilitas.
Perkenalkan, nama saya Bakhtiar S. Wicaksana, usia 43 tahun, profesi saya sebagai seniman pantomim. Dampak pandemi ini sangat luar biasa bagi keluarga saya. Karena profesi saya juga guru pantomim, guru teater, kadang ambil job syuting. Begitu pandemi datang, syuting hilang. Ngajar otomatis libur, pertunjukan hampir nggak ada. Ibaratnya ya, hari ini mau makan apa ya? Nah, dampaknya lagi kena ke anak-anak. Jadi belajar di rumah online, harus beli kuota, harus apa, bingung saya. Kendalanya juga banyak banget, karena saya punya satu handphone. Anak-anak belajar online pakai handphone. Nah, kalau handphone itu buat saya nyari duit, terus anak-anak terpaksa nggak bisa ikut online kan. Sinyalnya di sini juga, aduh, anak saya kadang keluar rumah jalan ke ujung itu untuk nyari sinyal, itu cuman buat terima tugas dari gurunya. Ya kalau pakai kuota kan lemot. Ya kalau saya mau pakai wifi, pasang wifi mahal. Belum suruh buka link YouTube. Ya kalau kuota kita chat harian mana bisa buka YouTube kan gitu. Ya begitu keadaannya.
Agar perkembangan ekonomi digital dapat lebih inklusif, perubahan digital perlu dilakukan secara fundamental. Jika tidak, dikhawatirkan gap kemampuan digital akan semakin besar. Apa yang bisa kita lakukan? Salah satunya, mempersempit gap konektivitas di seluruh Indonesia dengan menyediakan akses dan infrastruktur digital yang terjangkau, stabil, cepat, dan dapat diakses semua kalangan. Dan yang tak kalah penting, meningkatkan literasi digital. Kepercayaan terhadap layanan finansial digital juga harus ditingkatkan di skala nasional. Salah satunya dengan memastikan perlindungan konsumen dan keamanan data personal. Yang terakhir, membangun infrastruktur agar logistik dapat mencapai lebih banyak daerah, sehingga konsumen maupun pemilik usaha di daerah-daerah bisa mendapatkan kesempatan yang sama dengan mereka yang tinggal di kota-kota besar.
Sepertinya kan belum ada perlindungan data pengguna jaringan digital gitu ya. Jadi perlu kemudian dibuat supaya kami pengguna internet itu bisa terlindungi, supaya kita semua bisa lebih nyaman gitu ya saat kita menggunakan internet.
Ya, saya pikir di masa depan ekonomi digital itu akan semakin berkembang pesat, serba online semuanya. Ya, harapannya dengan adanya literasi pendidikan internet di sekolah akan sangat berguna buat anak saya atau anak-anak yang lainnya. Mereka bisa membandingkan internet yang baik yang mana, yang buruk yang mana. Itu ke depan mereka bisa menggunakan internet dengan lebih positif.
Selamat pagi, a very good morning, and a warm welcome to all of you who are joining us in this webinar, Beyond Unicorns, Building the Foundations for Digital Government in Indonesia. My name is Biondi Sima from World Bank. I will be hosting you throughout this webinar. This morning, we are graced with the presence of Ibu Belorma Amga Bazar, Operations Manager at World Bank Indonesia and Timor-Leste, who will deliver an opening address. We are also honored to host Bapak Chow Ho Chan, Government Chief Digital Technology Officer, Smart Nation and Digital Government Office, and Deputy Chief Executive at Government Technology Agency of Singapore, who will deliver a keynote speech from his learnings and current state of affairs in harnessing digital at the core of Singaporean government services. To bring the context back home, our colleague Bapak Jonathan Marskal, Senior Program Officer, Identification for Development, ID for the Initiative at World Bank, will present us brief recommendations to better digital government transformation in Indonesia, derived from World Bank's flagship report, Beyond Unicorns, Leveraging Digital Technologies for Inclusion in Indonesia. Digital government is a broad and complex issue, and it is only right that we hear directly from our esteemed practitioners and policymakers sitting with us this morning as our esteemed panelists. Our lineup today will present views from public and private sectors with experiences from both national and sub-national initiatives. We have this morning with us, and please join me in welcoming our panelists, Prof. Sudan Arif Fakrullah, Director General of Dukcapil at Ministry of Home Affairs, Ibu Rini Widiantini, Deputy Minister for Institutional and Governance Affairs at Ministry of Administrative and Bureaucratic Reforms, Bapak Setiaji, Chief of Digital Transformation Office, DTO at Ministry of Health, and Ibu Shirley Dewayani Santoso, President Director and Head of Transformation in Asia at PT AD Kearney. The panel discussion will be moderated by no other than Ibu Leslie Goh, our Senior Technology Advisor at World Bank. Ibu Leslie will also summarize the key takeaways from the discussion by the end of the session. Esteemed guests, you have the choice to listen to our program this morning in English or in Bahasa Indonesia by clicking the option button available on your screen. The event today is also live streamed via Bank Dunia Facebook account. We would also like to invite you to follow the World Bank Indonesia Twitter account at Bank Dunia, and please use the hashtag Digital Indonesia to follow up with conversation on this matter in social media. I am aware that we have hundreds of eager participants joining us in the Zoom right now. I would warmly invite you to address your questions through the Q&A chat box as the program progresses. Esteemed guests, to get the conversation going, let us hear from our Operations Manager at World Bank Indonesia and Timor-Leste, Ibu Belorma Amga Bazar. Halo Ibu, apa kabar? The screen is yours, Ibu.
Selamat pagi dan terima kasih Mas Biondi. Yang saya hormati Mr. Chow Ho Chan, Government Chief Digital Technology Officer, Government of Singapore, Professor Sudan Arif Fakrullah, Direktur Jenderal Dukcapil, Kemendagri, Ibu Rini Wijiantini, Deputi Bidang Kelembagaan dan Tata Laksana, Kementerian Pendaya Gunaan Aparatur Negara dan Reformasi Birokrasi, Bapak Sitiaji, Chief Digital Transformation Officer dari Kementerian Kesehatan, Ibu Shirley Santoso, President Director dan Head of Transformation in Asia, PT AT Kearney, Ms. Leslie Go, Senior Technology Advisor in the World Bank, tim Bank Dunia yang menyusun Beyond Unicorns Report dan yang selenggarakan acara hari ini, Bapak Ibu peserta webinar dari berbagai kementerian, lembaga, maupun sektor swasta, akademisi, think tank, NGOs, komunitas masyarakat yang hadir, dan rekan-rekan saya di Bank Dunia. Selamat pagi semua. Suatu kehormatan bagi saya untuk menyambut Anda di webinar hari ini. Ini adalah webinar kedua dari seri webinar yang kami selenggarakan untuk mensosialisasikan laporan Beyond Unicorns, Harnessing Digital Technologies for Inclusion in Indonesia, yang telah diluncurkan bulan Juli lalu. Pagi ini kita akan mencoba mendalami lebih lanjut fondasi yang diperlukan bagi pemerintah digital atau yang biasa disebut dengan digital government. Adapun yang akan dipelajari adalah bagaimana teknologi digital termasuk identitas digital dan modernisasi sektor publik dapat memberikan dan meningkatkan manfaat kepada masyarakat melalui pemerintahan yang lebih inklusif, lebih efektif, dan lebih efisien. Pemerintahan digital memiliki potensi yang besar. Pada saat yang bersamaan, hal ini merupakan sebuah kebutuhan yang sangat mendesak. Pemerintahan digital dapat memfasilitasi proses pembuatan keputusan, perencanaan program, dan layanan publik yang lebih baik. Kita bisa melihat bagaimana penggunaan teknologi digital menjadi kunci untuk penanganan pandemi COVID-19 di berbagai negara, termasuk juga di Indonesia. Dengan adanya identitas digital juga memungkinkan warga negara dan penduduk untuk memverifikasi identitas legal mereka dan mengakses layanan publik dan swasta secara tanpa tatap muka. Di berbagai negara seperti di Singapura, di Korea Selatan, atau di Australia, pemerintahan digital juga telah memfasilitasi perlindungan sosial yang komprehensif, mempercepat respon pemerintah terhadap krisis, dan mendukung pengambilan kebijakan yang lebih cepat dan lebih tepat. Namun, memaksimalkan potensi dari pemerintahan digital tidak hanya berkait kepada pengembangan aplikasi atau teknologi. Banyaknya aplikasi yang dikembangkan mungkin terlihat sebagai sebuah kemajuan, tapi kalau banyaknya sistem yang tidak terintegrasi satu sama lain, justru dapat menyulitkan pengguna, utamanya masyarakat yang diharapkan diuntungkan dengan adanya layanan digital. Interoperabilitas sistem informasi dan data juga perlu dikelola dengan baik agar dapat menjadi aset dan dukungan bagi pengambil kebijakan alih-alih permasalahan yang baru. Pandemi COVID-19 telah semakin menyadarkan kebutuhan akan perubahan proses dan praktik dalam pemerintahan untuk mengakselerasi transformasi digital pemerintah. Beberapa pertanyaan yang perlu kita dipikirkan bersama, misalnya hal apa yang perlu diubah dan ditingkatkan, dan bagaimana Indonesia dapat melakukan ini secara efektif. Saya berharap webinar hari ini akan menjadi awal diskusi lebih lanjut dan lebih mendalam antara berbagai pihak dalam mewujudkan transformasi digital pemerintah di Indonesia. Sekali lagi, terima kasih Bapak Ibu dan selamat mengikuti webinar hari ini.
Baik. Terima kasih Ibu Balorma for that warm opening address to kick us off. Without further ado, I would like to invite Bapak Chow Ho Chan, who would deliver the keynote message this morning. over to you, Bob.
You got the screens out here. Yeah, selamat pagi. Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you, Ibu, for the introduction. I think we all know that the digital space is really moving very fast. And what's even more important is that it's become a significant part of society. So, you know, if you look at what has happened over the last couple of years, Singapore started this journey probably about 30 years ago, very much about computerization. It's really about how does technology support the government as far back as in the early 80s, late 80s and early 90s. And then over time, by the time we reached about 2000, technology became very much a great enabler of the government. It really allows government to function in a more effective way. And by the time we reach about 2010, because of the prevalence of e-services, technology really became a part of government. Today, you really can't take them apart, right? You know, when you equate government services, most of it in Singapore is done through technology. Now, I think the challenge going forward is that when will we ever reach a point whereby technology becomes the heart of the government, whereby, you know, it's quite interesting. I came from a banking environment whereby now all the banks are saying that they are more like a technology company than a bank because technology drives almost everything. And I think our hope is that, you know, maybe in a couple of years' time, technology can truly become the heart of government, making government a lot more efficient, serving more people, and becoming a lot more effective in the way we execute government programs going forward. But, you know, this journey is not a simple journey. We went through a lot of difficulty because it's really quite difficult for a government, the size of a government, to truly embrace technology. People need to come together. People need to learn from each other, and people need to be re-educated in a sense to appreciate what technology can do. And the entire government business model has to change over time. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So what is the foundation, right? For us, I think leadership was very important. We were very lucky that our Prime Minister himself set the tone from day one. He's a strong believer in technology and digital technology. And he's the one that kind of like pushed all of us to really adopt technology at scale within the whole of government and also within the whole country. So leadership, actually, I think it's probably one of the most important driving factor. And it's not just one person, but it's really leadership throughout the entire government that's important. The second thing that I think is quite important is capability. When I first joined GovTech and SNDG in 2014, we found that we had very little capability. We outsourced almost everything. And that was by itself a problem because we were so reliant on vendors to do everything for us, so much so that most of the people who are doing technology in the government really don't even understand technology. It's a big problem. So we really had to reorganize, regroup, rehire, really a whole bunch of people with very strong tech capability, and that has really been the accelerator in which we have been able to drive technology adoption and implementation in government. The third thing that I think is quite a foundation is also the culture. Technology requires innovation. Technology requires us to be able to think outside the box, adopt very different business models or operating models. And if you don't have the culture for that, if you are laden with bureaucracy, if you are laden with a lot of the very typical government way of doing things, it becomes very hard to break from that mold and do something different. So creating that culture was also a very important foundation that we built. The next part is urgency, right? You know, urgency is a very interesting thing. And I think the best example is the pandemic, right? You know, in the past, whenever we do a technology project, there were a lot of roadblocks. Oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. Procurement takes you 9 months. Budgeting takes you another 3 months, etc., etc. But when the pandemic came, everything happened in weeks because we didn't have time to waste. Now, it's a great example to learn from because the sense of urgency is what makes changes happen. And I think the pandemic has really taught us a lot about how urgency can help us basically drive a better implementation of digital government. Policy and governance is very important because that has to experience dramatic changes. Our policy and governance today is very much focused on a non-digital world. And I think our ability to change that quickly, to be able to keep pace with the developments in digitalization is critical for us to move forward. And then finally, I can't emphasize this more. I think our move to cloud, our move to platform, and the ability to leverage a global ecosystem has helped us accelerate digitalization significantly. Again, the pandemic was a great example. We built Trace Together app in 4 weeks. It wasn't 4 months or 4 years. Why? Because we leveraged cloud. We used a lot of the ecosystem that was already out there in the cloud. We use services technology like Firebase, for example. So these things are important. It allows us to accelerate and to make things happen. I just wanted to show this chart, which is kind of a strange chart, right? This chart is about what I would call inflection points. We probably started this journey when our Prime Minister announced Smart Nation in 2014. And during that time, I think we had gone through a lot of ups and downs. And one thing you realize is that we started very small by building standalone apps. And then we went to a full-scale agile digital platforms. Then cloud adoption came in about 2017-18. We started building a full stack for the government. Then pandemic came and really tested us. You know, when the pandemic came around, everybody challenged us. They said, well, you said digital is so good. You all can do things quickly. You are very agile. Show us. And we did. We built, as I said, a Trace Together app in like 4 weeks. We built the GoWare platform in another 3 or 4 weeks. We built a token, the Trace Together token, in about 6 weeks. So all of a sudden, people realized that things can be done quickly, at scale, and with a lot of quality. I think now, as we're moving past the pandemic, hopefully, I think the ability to look at one government is quite important. Now, you'll see 2 words there, digitization and digitalization. What's the difference? In the beginning, I think most of the things we're doing was about digitization, whereby we took legacy systems and many of the stuff we do and just made it digital. We didn't change much of the process. We didn't change part of the model. But when, over time, the most important impact is our ability to reinvent our business model, our approach to problem solving, and using technology to do that. And that's true digitalization. Just taking a legacy system and putting it on the cloud is not digitalization, it's digitization. Just taking manual documents and converting it in a PDF is digitization. It doesn't change things dramatically. And in the industry, we used to have this thing called 10x, 10 times, meaning that, you know, if things don't change by 10 times or more, you are not digitalizing, you are just digitizing. So I think that's quite important. You also see this chart, something quite important, the dotted lines. At every single point of this journey, we could have failed and we could have gone downwards. So success is not assured. We keep having to prove ourselves and keep having to show that whatever we do needs to be accelerated as we move forward. Otherwise, you know, at any time we could have failed and we could have gone backwards quite easily. So this is a tough journey. It's not a simple one, but it really rests upon 4 very important things for digital government. You see the word reduce there, right? I think the first very important thing that we should all think about all the time is to reduce complexity. Government is very complex today because over the years, we keep piling on more and more things, right? And at a certain point in time, you realize that things got so complex that nobody knows what to do about it anymore. And if you take a complex system like that and you move it to the cloud, you are not solving any problem. So reducing complexity is very much the first thing you should think about. And understanding the problem you're trying to solve is very important. Second thing is about reducing duplication. You know what's the most incredible thing about governments? We got probably about 30 of everything, right? If you think you got a licensing system, I'm sure if you look around Indonesia, you probably have 100 of them. If you think you got a grants management system, I'm sure you got 200 of them. We keep duplicating everything. Why? Because every agency do their own things. I think our ability to reuse and share is a very important part of digitalization. And that's something that Singapore, we've been trying to do quite a fair bit. Like we're moving towards one licensing system platform, one grants platform, one governance platform, etc. The idea is to make something that can be shared with more and more agencies rather than everybody reinventing the wheel. The third concept is what we call tech debt. And this is really associated with the first two, right? Government system has been there for many years. And because it had been there for many years, we keep piling on more and more things, right? We make it more and more complex. What we call in the technology parlance, we say that we have accumulated tech debt over the years, meaning that the system has gotten so hard to change that nobody even dares to try it. Our ability to take this out is very important. The concept of what we call refactoring is very important. The concept of reducing complexity is very important. Because if we don't do that, it's almost impossible to create new systems in government. And every system will then cost you $50 million, $100 million, because we're just dealing with a tech debt. That has to go away. Because if it doesn't, digitalization will not happen. The last concept is toil. What is toil? Toil, the English word toil means labor. It means doing unnecessarily manual, laborious things. So the picture there is really about, a lot of workers during World War II building the railway in Burma, right? A lot of toil. People are using hard manual labor, hammers and pickaxe to build a railway. Government infrastructure is full of toil. We have data centers that are still very manual, that requires a lot of people. Those things should be automated. If you go to a cloud provider like Google or Amazon, you realize that a huge data center is probably operated by 20 people. In a government, it's probably 200 people. Why? Because almost everything for them is automated. So the concept of what we call SRE, site reliability engineering, is very important. It's about how we can reduce toil so that we can digitalize faster and improve the quality of digitalization. Then the concept of identity. I was just having a meeting with with UK just a couple of days back. They are embarking on the profile of the digital identity. Why is digital identity important? Because it's kind of almost like the foundation of digitalization. And for Singapore, we are very, very lucky because we started with a physical identity. So everybody in Singapore has a NRIC or a digital or a physical IC. It's almost like your KTP in Indonesia, basically. So about 15 years ago, we started converting that physical identity into SingPass, which is our digital identity. And over time, SingPass has evolved into what we call a national digital identity platform. So it's not just an IC anymore. It has MyInfo, digital signature, verify, facial ID, authorize, etc. So it becomes a family of products that allows for digital identification and authentication. So if you look on the extreme left, you realize that we officially has now made the digital ID or digital IC a nationally recognized identification. So today you can walk out of your house without bringing your physical IC along with you. Now, why does it take so long? Because this has a legislative component in it. From a legislation point of view, in the past, only the physical ID was considered the national ID. But over time, as SingPass became more prevalent, today more than 4 million people in Singapore have SingPass. So it has now become a pervasive digital ID that is recognized by the government and also a lot of institutions in Singapore, which means that today you can really walk out of your house without bringing your IC. You just bring your phone and you'll be recognized, basically. My info is a very important thing. What we also did was that, and I'll talk a lot about single source of truth later on. We were able to put together a lot of the critical information of people under the SingPass platform. So today, for example, when you open a bank account in Singapore, you don't have to bring any physical document to the banks anymore. You do it online, you consent to give the data will be sent through an API to the bank. The bank will treat the data as verified data. It processes it, and you can get your bank account open in literally minutes rather than a couple of weeks or days. So I think that's really the power of information. We are now also pushing out digital signature, whereby it's really a irrevocable trusted signature that you can do for legal documents. Verify is really about verifying. We actually use Verify for even things like machines to dispense drinks. For example, it verifies who you are, and then it connects to your payment system, and then here it goes. So the long and short is that identity is really the bedrock of digitalization. Unless you have pervasive identity, it's actually very difficult to go forward. Behind that is something that many people will not see, is there are really a bunch of accelerators. We have built very much a core infrastructure that has very important digital workplace tools. We moved to the commercial cloud about 2.5 years ago now, and we are committed to put 70% of our workloads in a government onto the commercial cloud. We built a government tech stack that allows us to do full stack development in a very coherent and a systemized way of development that allows us to really develop applications very quickly, because we share a lot of components in there, both from a DevOps layer level all the way to the services level. We have started to kind of recreate the cyber paradigm from what we call on-prem cybersecurity paradigm to a zero trust architecture, which is very much more appropriate for the cloud. Our data science team has done a lot of productization of data and engineering of data, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, which is also very critical, because at the heart of digitalization is good data, shareable data, and actionable data, which is very important. And now we've even gone one step further to start also building robotics middleware framework and IoT platform on the stack itself, so as to be able to connect digital to physical things as you go forward. Now, data, we talk about data, it's very important. The biggest challenge, I think, in government is about the cleanliness of data. Government has a lot of data, but government got a lot of very dirty and duplicated data. So about 6 years ago, we started on this concept of single source of truth. I'm sure if you search your government, all your government systems, each citizen probably has about 10 or 15 addresses. Why? Because everybody collects their own. So we had to start designating what we call single source of truth. Like address for us is collected only by ICA, which is our Immigration Checkpoint Authority. Marriage status is only collected by Registrar of Marriage. Income is only collected by IRAS, which is our Inland Revenue Service, etc. So once we have designated this single source of truth, we have clean data, and that's very important. The next stage is that we then need a bunch of trusted centers to be able to fuse this data, to make this data usable, to have insights in this data. And then finally, our ability to then train data users within the government as well as outside the government to use the data effectively to solve problems. And you'll be surprised, we are committed to train more than 20,000 civil servants to know how to solve problems using data. And that's a very important way of making sure that we all are using data as a way of life, rather than just by some small group of data scientists. And then finally, my last slide, actually, all this comes together. It's really about trying to become one government, whereby we face the citizens, the businesses, and our government employees really as one government. The one government approach is really anchored by the national digital identity, And we got a couple of key apps like Life SG, which is really about moments of life of citizens, Go Business, which is really about moments of life of businesses, and we got Digital Workplace, is really for our employees. So it's one front to be able to front the citizens, the businesses, and the employees. And behind that is really the concept of the stack that allows us to automate quickly, allows us to be very agile in the way we deploy these things, and to be able to scale as quickly as we can for whatever we do. So with that, I hope I've been able to share something in this short period of time, and I'm sure we have a lot to learn from Indonesia too. And so, I hope that this will be the start of a journey whereby we can also exchange information, exchange learning, and learn from each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bapak Chan, for such an incredibly inspiring keynote speech this morning. We think there are a lot to learn from your team experience building digital government in Singapore, most definitely. And while there might be a great deal of differences to Indonesia's context, putting digital technology at the heart of the government is something that Indonesians would greatly benefit from. Now, esteemed guests, allow me to remind you once again that you have the option to follow today's program in Bahasa Indonesia and in English by clicking the preferred language in your language section at the bottom of your screen. Now, to further contextualize the much-awaited panel discussion and link it back to our current standing here in Indonesia, our report team, represented by Bapak Jonathan Marskell, will present some key findings from the Beyond Unicorns Harnessing Digital Technologies for Inclusion in Indonesia, specifically with key recommendations related to the foundations of digital government in Indonesia. Now, I'd like to turn to Pak Jonathan. You may please have the floor. Please, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Biondi, and selamat pagi, everybody. First, I want to sincerely thank Mr. Chan for the really great presentation. I actually happen to live in Singapore and am a beneficiary and user of a lot of the tools and platforms that were presented, and I can tell you they are really wonderful, and there's a lot of useful experiences and knowledge there in Singapore that would be beneficial for Indonesia. I also want to acknowledge my friend, Professor Zudan, Ibu Rini, Bapak Setiaji, and Ibu Shirley. It's going to be a very interesting panel. And then finally, although you're seeing my face, as Pak Biondi said, this report, the Beyond Unicorns report, actually was an effort of a very large World Bank team. So without further ado, I'm going to go through some of the relevant recommendations. So first, the purpose of this research was to answer the question of what can be done to allow all Indonesians, Indonesian people, Indonesian businesses as well, to benefit from the digital economy, which is taking such a large part of our social and economic lives. And it covered three themes. The first theme was make the digital economy work for all. And we had a webinar recently about that. The second theme, which is what we're talking about today and what I'll go through in more detail, is on using technology to upgrade the interactions between citizen and the state. And then third is, and this will be the subject of a future webinar, improving digital connectivity and universalizing access. So under the theme of digital government, there are three broad recommendations, and I'm going to go through each of these in more detail. The first is embracing a whole of government approach to digital transformation. The second is in recognition, as Chao Ho mentioned, identity is the foundation of many services. So Indonesia has an opportunity, therefore, to develop a national digital ID framework. And then third is to move towards a whole of government data integration and management. So in terms of a whole of government approach to digital transformation of the government, obviously the benefits of this would be greater efficiency, greater effectiveness, greater scalability, flexibility, and responsiveness. Chao Ho mentioned how the government was able to quickly develop certain apps as part of the COVID-19 response. There's examples across the region of countries that have a lot of these platforms in place already, being able to quickly deploy social assistance and cash transfers when societies and economies were locked down. Now, in Indonesia, there is some solid foundations for this already. There is the presidential regulation on e-government, SPBE. It's a solid foundation, but it focuses mostly on digitization rather than digitalization, which, as Chao Ho mentioned, is really about reimagining how things are done rather than simply computerizing or digitizing it. The second is, of course, Indonesia is a large and complex country, many different stakeholders, many different levels of government, many cultures, many languages, etc. So coordination is a challenge. And this is a given, and this is not unique to Indonesia, obviously. Indonesia is much larger than Singapore, so it becomes more difficult for that coordination to take place. And then the coordination that does take place, it requires a lot of effort. The resources that exist within the e-government team, everyone has existing day jobs, existing mandates, and so there is a high cost for the coordination that takes place. So what can be done? First of all, reimagining how government works, the processes, the systems, the procedures, the structures, how different, reimagining from agencies to a person-centered approach, a life event approach to digital government. The second is to perhaps consider an agency, an existing or a new agency that would spearhead, particularly at the policy level, and have multi-ministry oversight with authority to enforce those policies on digital government, to move towards that one government approach. And then third is, in terms of implementation, to increase the capability to accelerate the delivery of cross-sectoral services, while also reinforcing the good capacity and assets that exist. For example, the Ministry of Health has done some fantastic things with the contact tracing apps and the vaccine certificates. In terms of an example, well, we've just heard from Singapore, and obviously their approach of institutional arrangements is, it works. And so there are key lessons that can be drawn from that. Second, in terms of digital identity, in fact, I want to acknowledge from the start that Indonesia has a very strong foundation. That complexity that I mentioned earlier, the fact that around 95% or more of adults have been registered with Dukcapil is a huge accomplishment. Of course, there are some eastern regions, for example, where coverage is lagging. But when you consider the size, the demography and the geography of Indonesia, this is an accomplishment. And now it's about moving from the physical identity to the digital identity, allowing Indonesians to do all kinds of transactions online. We hear continuously, for example, from fintech and financial service providers that there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of fraud in current approaches for onboarding. So they struggle, for example, with doing electronic know your customer processes. And the opportunity of digital identity, when you allow Indonesians to do any kind of transaction online, completely end-to-end online, is that you don't, this can break down the distance and physical barriers for people in remote areas to access government and private sector services, right? So as long as they have the internet, as long as they have a smartphone, they can access services. So I mentioned the strong asset of the existing national ID system. Dukcapil has already begun testing some of the relevant technologies, and I'm sure Professor Zudan will elaborate further. And it's also worth noting, within the context of ASEAN, all the other high income and upper middle income economies have begun their own national digital identity initiatives. So what can be done? We're recommending that there should be a whole of country initiative around digital identity. The base is going to be Dukcapil and the population data there, but it requires buy-in from all stakeholders, those who regulate, those who provide technology, those who consume digital identity. Then, and I saw a question on this already, to explore mutual recognition of digital identity with other countries, particularly to advance cross-border use cases. With Indonesia chairing G20 next year, there's an opportunity for Indonesia to champion these issues. And we know that there's a number of countries that are interested in this. The European Union already has a framework, and they're advancing that. And there's bilateral arrangements taking place across the world. Third is to close those remaining gaps. Of course, legal identity is a right. It's linked to so many other rights, and good progress is being made in that regard. But also to ensure that births and deaths are registered and recorded in a timely fashion. And then to scale up eKYC, particularly for in-person transactions as well. Finally, these are all great things that I'm discussing, but also it's important to have the safeguards in place. And therefore, an urgent enacting of the personal data protection law will provide a lot of trust and public confidence that any kind of personal data won't be misused. In terms of a good example, Australia has developed the Trusted Digital Identity Framework. These documents are publicly available. There's draft legislation already as well, and it's in the pilot phase. And again, there is some. It's not perfect. You can't copy paste that and put it in Indonesia, but there's a lot of useful elements that perhaps can be adapted for Indonesia. Finally, in terms of data management and integration, and the whole government approach again comes to the fore. As Chao Ho said, this is one of the key elements of government. One of the key challenges for government is in sharing data amongst agencies, sharing with the private sector as well when authorized, the portability of data, the interoperability of data, the reuse of data. Particularly for key use cases, I've mentioned social protection, but of course there's healthcare, education, financial services, or this related to trade, related to all kinds of things that people and businesses do on a day-to-day basis. Now, obviously in Indonesia, this is very challenging to coordinate. There is the Satu Data presidential regulation. It's a very good start, but it has not yet been fully operationalized. And so in terms of what can be done, implementation of Satu Data comprehensively, especially in relevant sectors, that are relevant to the COVID-19 recovery, will be important. Education, health, social protection, and for micro and SME and small and medium enterprises. There's a need to develop standards and infrastructure. For example, strengthening the government service bus that Kominfo has developed. And then building alliances amongst all these institutions. Bappenas, obviously, as the standard bearer for the Satu Data, Menpan RB, Ibu Rini, I'm sure we'll talk more about this, Kominfo, Ministry of Home Affairs, all Ministry of Health as well, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Social Affairs, etc., to ensure that the principles of Satu Data are being implemented in all new activities and integrated into all existing activities. A good example is Estonia. I'm sure you've heard of the X Road or XT. We talk in Indonesia of a Jalan X, and hopefully one day that can be realized. And I would encourage you as well, the World Development Report, which is the World Bank's corporate flagship report, this year covered data for better lives, and it recommends a new social contract for data. It also recommends countries to develop integrated national data ecosystems. So I would encourage you to access that and consume that report. So that concludes my presentation. I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm very pleased now to hand it over to my dear friend Leslie Go to take us to the panel. Leslie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Selamat pagi. What a great presentation on the importance of the national digital identity. And I'm also very grateful to my dear friend Chao Ho for sharing Singapore digital transformation journey. This is an important topic we discussed since we first met in 2014 when I was first posted to Singapore. And fast forward to today, COVID is an important inflection point, as he rightfully pointed out. And that puts digital government through such a test in the real world. This externality creates a sense of urgency to governments all around the world to change almost overnight and pivot into the digital space. To build the foundations for digital government, it is not just about technology. As Chao Ho mentioned very clearly, it is a lot of other factors, and very importantly, pragmatic leadership, a mindset shift, to create a digital culture. The World Economic Forum report on digital culture is the driving force of digital transformation that frames it very nicely. Organizations with a strong digital culture use digital tools and data-powered insights to create and drive decisions and user centricity while innovating and collaborating across the entire organization. When implemented purposefully, digital culture can drive sustainable action and create value for all stakeholders. I am honored today to be joined by such distinguished speakers. I would like to turn this segment to them for their reflection and for the presentation of Singapore's experience and the World Bank's recommendations. What do you think are the most important 1 or 2 key takeaways for Indonesia's digital government transformation? May I ask each of you to share your thoughts in less than 2 minutes, please? First, we start with Professor Zudan. Over to you.
Ya, terima kasih Leslie Go, dan izinkan saya menyapa dulu sahabat saya Pak Jonathan Merkel dari Bank Dunia, juga Pak Choho dari Singapura yang sudah mengelola Singpas. Terima kasih paparan bagusnya. Juga sahabat-sahabat saya di Indonesia, ada Bu Rini Witianti ini, Ibu Deputi, Mas Setiaji, dan Shirley Santoso. Kalau saya lihat ada yang menarik dan bagus sekali, tadi saya dengarkan, pertama, komitmen yang kuat dari pemerintah Singapura, political commitment, kemudian political will yang kuat, dan yang kedua roadmap-nya dibangun dengan sangat bagus. Dan roadmap ini dari aspek perencanaannya kuat, sampai di level eksekusinya juga kuat. Semuanya disusun secara detail, kemudian direncanakan secara detail, setelah itu eksekusinya juga dilakukan secara detail. Dan yang terakhir yang saya lihat adalah ekosistemnya dibangun dengan baik. Itu yang tadi saya lihat. Itu Ibu Leslie.
May I also now invite Ibu Rini to share with us her thoughts and reflection.
Baik, terima kasih Ibu Leslie. Terima kasih Pak dari Pak Marskal, kemudian Pak Choho dari Singapura, juga Prof. Zudan ini sahabat saya. Secara umum sebetulnya saya melihat bahwa saya sependapat yang disampaikan oleh Pak Choho maupun Pak Jonathan Marskal bahwa sebetulnya ketika melakukan digital transformasi, kita itu tidak hanya sekedar melakukan transformasi teknologinya saja, tetapi banyak hal yang lain yang saya kira perlu menjadi pertimbangan. Karena inilah yang akan menjadi fondasi dasar di dalam kita melakukan transformasi tata kelola pemerintahan. Kalau dari pengalaman dari Singapura itu bahwa teknologi itu akan menjadi jantung pemerintah, kita sedang berusaha mengarah ke sana karena kita melihat bahwa perubahan atau transformasi digital bagi instansi pemerintah itu bukan sekedar kebutuhan, tetapi memang menjadi keharusan lagi gitu ya. Jadi kita memang harus segera berubah, dan ketika seluruh dunia mulai kita terkena pandemi, maka transformasi digital itu menjadi salah satu hal yang harus kita lakukan. Kemudian juga saya juga mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Pak Jonathan, tadi sudah memberikan insight bagaimana whole government approach yang akan menjadi rekomendasi kepada kami. Kita juga memang melihat bahwa proses dalam Perpres SPB ini, nanti saya akan cerita mengenai hal tersebut ya, memang masih berkesan masih digitasi transformation. Oleh karena itu kita memang masih banyak beberapa hal yang perlu kita lakukan, dan juga kami melihat bahwa kita memang perlu ada satu pemikiran apa sih sebetulnya yang menjadi titik awal di dalam melakukan transformasi digital, baik itu untuk pemerintah maupun kepada seluruh masyarakat, dan starting point daripada single identity number atau bagaimana digitalisasi di dalam data kependudukan yang sedang dibangun oleh Prof. Judan hari ini, menurut saya itu merupakan satu starting point yang baik, dan pemerintah Indonesia juga sekarang sudah mulai dari tim Satu Data Indonesia sudah mengarah kepada single source of truth untuk data nasional. Demikian mungkin pandangan kami terhadap paparan sebelumnya. Terima kasih. Saya kembalikan kepada Ibu Leslie.
Thank you, Ibu Rini. I'd like to turn over to Pak Setiati to comment on what you've learned from the previous speaker so far.
Ya, oke. Terima kasih Bu Leslie. Kemudian di sini saya juga menyapa dulu beberapa narasumber yang lain, Prof. Sudan, dan Bu Rini, dan kemudian teman-teman yang lain dari World Bank, serta tadi sangat menarik apa yang sudah disampaikan oleh World Bank dan juga dari GovTech Singapura. Ya. Saya sudah cukup lama mengamati apa yang dilakukan oleh GovTech semenjak saya waktu itu di Jakarta ya hingga saat ini. Dan saya mencoba melengkapi apa yang tadi sudah disampaikan oleh Prof. Sudan dan Bu Rini. Jadi sering sekali ya selalu ditanyakan ke saya itu kalau terhadap inisiatif digital government adalah mengenai sustainability ataupun keberlanjutan. Ya bagus di awal gitu ya, terus kemudian jika terjadi pergantian kepemimpinan bagaimana? Karena di Indonesia sendiri kan termasuk juga mungkin di beberapa negara pergantian kepemimpinan itu juga akan selalu kita hadapi ya. Kalau di Indonesia mulai dari nasional, kemudian provinsi, hingga sampai dengan level kabupaten kota, itu akan terjadi pergantian kepemimpinan. Nah, beberapa program digital inisiatif itu ada yang berlanjut, gitu ya, tetapi kadang tidak jadi strategis, dan kemudian ada juga yang akhirnya mati di jalan. Nah, oleh karena itu kita sepertinya perlu meredefinisikan kembali. Tadi ada salah satu slide yang cukup bagus tentang digital government initiative ini, apakah sudah menjadi part gitu ya dari pemerintahan, ya syukur-syukur sudah bisa menjadi heart gitu ya, pemerintahan, sehingga ini bisa melekat ke seluruh bagian pemerintahan, bukan hanya di level pimpinannya, tetapi juga di seluruh staf yang ada di pemerintahan tersebut. Nah, kemudian satu hal lagi adalah inisiatif digital government ini. Saat ini kan hanya ada di beberapa sektor ya, seperti di kementerian ya, ada di Kementerian Kesehatan, terus kemudian ada Dukcapil, ada di Kementerian Tenaga Kerja, terus kemudian pendidikan dan sebagainya. Kemudian di daerah juga sudah ada beberapa inisiatif tapi sepertinya kita juga perlu memikirkan yang dilakukan oleh Singapura, melakukan inisiasi GovTech Indonesia yang di level nasional, sehingga meleverage beberapa isu-isu lintas sektoral, karena sektoral itu tidak bisa berjalan sendiri tanpa adanya perekat lain ya di level nasional, sehingga beberapa inisiatif yang seperti dilakukan Singapura itu harusnya juga bisa dilakukan di Indonesia. Ya, terima kasih.
Thank you so much. I'd like to also turn it to Ibu Shirley for your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and it's really great and exciting to hear all the sharing from Mr. Chan and also everybody here by Jonathan as well. And I think we are very much aligned dengan recommendation. Yeah? So we very much believe that the impact of digital government is really significant, whether it's to improve the quality of the services to citizens, but also, as Mr. Chan mentioned, reducing the complexity of the government process, make the government a lot more efficient. But again, to implement that successfully, you really need like a holistic approach. Tadi kita dengar ya banyak, whether it's the whole clarity of the roadmap, jadi a very clear North Star, where do you want to go and where's your ambition, and getting that also aligned with the whole government constituent is very important. Tadi Pak Setiadi mentioned that di Indonesia itu is still very much driven by the different function, but it's very important to make sure that everybody is aligned in terms of this is where we want to go. So very inspiring to see the government of Singapore's approach to have digital as in the heart of the government as its North Star. So again, reflecting back to Indonesia, gimana kita juga bisa menjadikan mempunyai suatu North Star for the whole government. I think it's very important. And second, also a very important element is how can we adopt a whole of government approach so that we can be a lot more efficient in terms of driving this digital initiative, reducing duplication of effort, but also having a better scale as well in terms of the scale of economy, and also maximizing the resources as well. Because again, Indonesia government is very complex, so the whole approach in terms of whether we create like a dedicated task force under the president, and again, I think the top sponsorship is also something that is very important. And also who will be the task force that also is implementing this on a day-to-day basis is also something that would be very important as well. And lastly is the factor around building the capabilities and culture. So again, I think to do this successfully, we also need to build the capabilities within the government entities, improving the digital literacy juga, making sure that we have the digital capabilities as well, and embedding in that in the culture, digital mindset. So those would also be very important to be able to do this successfully. So those would be some of the takeaways. Thank you, Leslie.
Well said. Well, let's bring the context back to Indonesia. I'd like to invite Professor Zudan back and hear from you. As you heard about how important SingPass is in the Singapore's digital identity and how it has enabled digital service delivery, what do Chapel's plan with respect to introducing a digital identity for Indonesians?
Ya, terima kasih Bu Leslie. Apa yang kita kerjakan saat ini, Indonesia memiliki bekal yang sudah sangat cukup. Penduduk kita 272 juta. Terbesar nomor 4 di dunia dan mendapatkan dukungan yang kuat dari Pak Menteri Dalam Negeri, Profesor Tito Karnavian, maupun dari Bapak Presiden sendiri. Beliau mendorong agar proses digitalisasi layanan itu bisa kita dorong lebih baik. Selain itu, mulai tumbuh kepercayaan dari berbagai lembaga untuk memanfaatkan data-data digital yang sudah kita susun. Di dalam Big Data Dukcapil sudah ada 196 juta pemilik KTPL yang KTPL fisiknya sudah kita cetak. Sama seperti Singapura, Indonesia memiliki modal untuk menuju identitas digital yang sangat bagus karena 98%, sekarang sudah masuk 99%, penduduk Indonesia sudah memiliki KTP elektronik. 1% itu tersisa di wilayah Papua dan Papua Barat, dan kecil-kecil tersebar di Indonesia yang lain. Nah, kita tahun ini sudah mengawali untuk membuat identitas digital. Sudah mulai pilot project, uji coba. Dan dari perbankan, industri keuangan juga sudah mulai memanfaatkan teknologi biometrik maupun face recognition untuk pelayanan publik. Untuk membuka rekening, untuk kontrak, ya, ditambah dengan digital signature. Jadi kita mulai bergerak menuju era digital. Dan Dukcapil, 514 cabang Dukcapil yang ada di pemerintah daerah, seluruhnya sudah bergerak digital. Layanannya bisa online, dokumennya juga bisa dikirim online. Bahkan di Indonesia, penduduk bisa mencetak sendiri dokumen kependudukan, dicetak di rumah. Karena semua pejabatnya sudah menggunakan digital signature, tanda tangan digital, tidak lagi tanda tangan dengan pena, tidak ada lagi cap, dan kita sudah secara sistem bisa dicetak sendiri oleh penduduknya, kecuali KTPL dan kartu identitas anak. Nah, untuk itu, agar semua bisa menuju digital, kita bergerak mulai tahun ini, KTP elektronik kita jadikan National Digital ID di Indonesia. Seperti itu, Bu Leslie, rencana kita.
Very impressive track record. Thank you, Professor. Now, I'd like to turn this over to Ibu Rini about the digital government transformation. It's more about a shift in mindset that we've heard about, and not just about platform and technology adoption. What kind of bureaucratic reforms and change in culture that you envision for Menpan RB to facilitate and enforce to enable agile workflow that puts digital at the core of the government?
Baik, jadi seperti saya sampaikan tadi, di dalam kita melakukan transformasi tata kelola pemerintahan itu bukan sekedar aspek teknologi informasinya saja, begitu. Jadi bukan masalah aplikasi atau platformnya saja, tetapi ada beberapa hal yang memang menjadi perhatian. Bapak Presiden sudah memerintahkan kepada Kemenpan RB melakukan transformasi tata kelola secara menyeluruh gitu. Oleh karena itu sekarang kita melakukan 3 hal saat ini untuk melakukan transformasi ya, atau reformasi birokrasi. Pertama, kita sudah melakukan transformasi organisasi. Jadi Presiden meminta supaya organisasi kita itu dilakukan penyederhanaan supaya terjadi percepatan di dalam pengambilan keputusan. Dan kemudian juga kita melakukan bagaimana transformasi di SDM-nya, termasuk transformasi untuk literasi untuk masalah digital. Nah, yang paling utama dari secara keseluruhan ini adalah kita akan melakukan perubahan di dalam sistem kerja pemerintahan, di mana yang paling penting itu yang sekarang kita perlukan adalah bagaimana proses bisnis antar pemerintah itu bisa dilakukan. Jadi ada 3 hal yang menjadi pendekatan di kita di dalam transformasi digital ini. Bagaimana government to government bekerja, government to citizen bekerja, government to private juga bisa bekerja. Tetapi yang perlu menjadi prioritas adalah bagaimana government to government bekerja dahulu, karena itu menjadi salah satu bagian bagaimana kita memberikan layanan kepada masyarakat. Nah, oleh karena itu proses bisnis antar pemerintah ini kenapa menjadi salah satu prioritas? Karena kita ingin memperbaiki bagaimana antar instansi itu bekerja. Pak Setiaji mungkin sudah mengeluarkan platform mengenai aplikasi Peduli Lindungi. Di balik aplikasi Peduli Lindungi itu tidak hanya berkaitan dengan satu kementerian. Jadi tidak hanya Kementerian Kesehatan saja, tetapi ada kementerian-kementerian lain yang tentu saja akan terlibat di dalam hal tersebut. Nah, oleh karena itu kita secara makronya tentu saja kita perlu melakukan perbaikan di dalam 3 hal ini sehingga tidak hanya kita berkaitan dengan masalah bagaimana digitalisasinya, tapi secara menyeluruhnya itu adalah bagaimana kita melakukan transformasi di dalam tata kelola pemerintahan. Demikian, Bu Leslie.
Great, thank you so much. I would like to now ask Pak Setiaji. I've heard a lot about you, even in your previous role as in the West Java Digital Service and Jakarta Smart City, that you've done very well in those environments. And how do you position such teams at the heart of digital reform in their respective institutions? And what are the challenges and lessons learned from this past? And what are your key milestones moving forward in this role?
Ya, oke. Terima kasih Bu Sli. Ya, pertama tentunya bersyukur ya saya bisa melakukan beberapa inisiasi di berbagai level dan kompleksitasnya ya. Tentunya sangat berbeda kompleksitas di Jakarta, kemudian juga di Jawa Barat, dan sekarang di level yang lebih tinggi lagi yaitu nasional. Nah, kalau kita berbicara mengenai proses pastinya banyak sekali menghadapi berbagai macam isu dan challenge dan tantangan, mulai dari rekrutmen, terus kemudian hingga saat ini hingga tim menjadi eksis ya. Nah, sangat banyak sekali perbedaan di berbagai level tadi, tetapi mostly sebagian besar tetap sama ya. Pertama dari sisi kebutuhan timnya, terus kemudian alasan kenapa dibentuknya digital team ini, termasuk juga metode dan proses untuk pembentukannya sendiri. Nah, tentunya tim ini tidak bisa seperti saat ini langsung saja gitu ya, seperti sulap, tetapi melalui rangkaian proses dan tahapan, mungkin kita bisa menyitir teori yang disampaikan oleh Bruce Tuckman ya, Tuckman tentang team development stages, di mana tim itu akan dilakukan melalui proses tahapan forming, terus kemudian ada storming-nya, ada badai, di mana pada waktu kita memasukkan tim ini, ada penerimaan, terus ada juga penolakan dari existing team yang ada. Dan kemudian hingga akhirnya menjadi mature dan kemudian norming, hingga kemudian menjadi performing. Nah, beberapa isu yang dihadapi tentunya pertama dari sisi bagaimana tim ini diletakkan ya, supaya ini bisa menjadi jantung dari pemerintahan tersebut, tentunya harus diletakkan pada posisi yang strategis dan kemudian memiliki power, serta tentunya yang berikutnya lagi harus fleksibel karena kita ingin memadukan antara birokrasi dan kemudian private sector. Makanya ini kita sebut juga sebagai startup tetapi bekerjanya di pemerintahan. Dan ini juga penting untuk mengattract talent-talent yang bagus gitu ya, karena kita ingin mengkombinasikan antara ASN dan non-ASN. Nah, secara porsi tentunya akan lebih banyak yang non-ASN karena kami punya isu bagaimana mendapatkan ASN yang berlatar belakang teknologi tadi ya, karena biasanya kita hanya dapat 1 atau 2, sementara kita butuh akselerasi. Nah, kemudian tentunya ini menjadi tantangan bagaimana kita mendapatkan talent-talent yang cukup bagus ya kalau ditanya mengenai tantangan terbesarnya, dan kemudian bagaimana kita bisa memblend dengan existing team. Ya kalau di daerah kita bisa membentuk unit ini ya under Diskominfo sebagai unit teknis gitu ya, dan kemudian nanti dikombin antara ASN as a leader, dan kemudian untuk technical timnya kita bisa ambil dari expertise dari startup dan sebagainya. Nah kemudian kalau di level kementerian tentunya akan lebih berbeda lagi karena di sana sudah ada pusat data informasi. Nah ini mau dijadikan apa gitu. Nah ini juga penting untuk kita mengeblend dengan mereka sehingga bukan tim yang diistimewakan tetapi justru tim yang sama-sama sebagai lokomotif untuk membawa perubahan tadi. Dan kemudian digital team ini tentunya akan menjadi tim yang bukan hanya membawa perubahan tadi tetapi juga justru menjadi sebuah inisiatif yang saat ini kalau kita lihat banyak sekali kementerian-kementerian yang melihat kami membentuk tim ini dan kemudian ingin juga menyelaraskan program-program seperti yang dilakukan di Kementerian Kesehatan. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much for sharing those great insights. In fact, we just finished our data hackathon for agriculture in Indonesia, and I'm very impressed by the number of young talents and innovators who submitted the proposal. And I have been very impressed by the youth that are enthusiastic. And so these are the digitally savvy young Indonesians who are ready to make an impact in digital transformation. So I hope that you will find more of these young talents to help you in your ministry. Now, I want to turn this over to Ibu Shirley. From a private sector perspective, now digital government transformation requires managing deep and difficult changes in the organizational level. What are your hopes and expectations of Indonesia's digital government transformation journey? And what are your key suggestions implementing change management in government?
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, so I guess, I mean, in terms of our hope and expectation is that the digital transformation at the government will actually help to achieve several outcomes. The first one yang kita ingin lihat is really that this whole digital government can provide better quality services for the citizens. So, and I think it's very exciting to see some of the initiatives that are ongoing be it the Peduli Lindungi app or the e-KTP, the e-hack and so on and so forth, that has really helped, or even on the licensing side, that has really helped to make things a lot more efficient for the citizens. So I think this objective needs to be in place to make sure that whatever digitalization effort that's undertaken is taken from a user-centric view. Jadi itu yang pertama yang kita harapkan from a private sector perspective. The second one is that the whole digital government initiative will enable the government to basically make better policy making using the AI, big data, so that the policy can be much more effective for the industry and it doesn't overlap. Jadi yang ini yang mungkin yang juga diharapkan dari private sector. Third of all is to allow that the whole digital government initiative can also enable the government to have a much more efficient operations. I think we heard from the Singapore government, how can the digital government transformation, cut some of the administrative work, maybe through RPA and so on and so forth. So like some of the examples in Estonia, 99% of the health data is fully digitalized, so the doctors can access the data much more efficiently. So that is also the hope that we can actually push forward in Indonesia. And I guess there's two more things. One is I think we heard also from Singapore, and also the initiative that has been started in Indonesia with One Data, that this digital government transformation can improve the quality and integration of data. The single source of truth for data itu saya rasa cukup penting buat Indonesia. Jadi bagaimana kita juga bisa memastikan bahwa digital transformation at the government of Indonesia juga can improve the quality and integration of data. And lastly, I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the digital transformation of government in Indonesia can create an inclusive growth for everybody, so can help to spur the economic growth in Indonesia, and also make sure that we don't have a digital dividend in Indonesia. So that are our hopes. Thank you, Leslie.
Great points. Thank you so much, Ibu. Perhaps on the topic on whole of government, I would like to bring Professor Zudan back to learn more about what's the effective way for Indonesia to achieve a coherent whole of government approach to digital government service delivery, and to promote better use and reuse of data so that citizens and businesses do not have to keep providing the same information each time they apply or access a service, like in the case of Estonia.
Ya, terima kasih Bu Leslie. Memang untuk Indonesia ini kita harus berpikir secara lebih khusus karena Indonesia sangat besar. Kemudian kita transformasinya tidak bisa berjalan bersama-sama. Kita memahami Indonesia dari Aceh sampai Papua, ya, birokrasinya juga demikian. Yang menguntungkan bagi kita, industri bertumbuh secara lebih bersama-sama, terutama industri keuangan. Maka model yang kita pakai adalah model berbagi pakai data, verifikasi dengan model berbagi pakai data. Kita sumbernya cukup satu saja, data kependudukan, untuk menentukan who you are, siapa dia, siapa identitas dia, karena penduduk kita sekarang sudah 99,2% memiliki KTP elektronik, sehingga identitasnya sudah bisa lebih didefinisikan dengan baik. Yang kedua, ekosistemnya kita bangun. Ekosistem untuk apa? Ekosistem untuk pemanfaatan data kependudukan dalam semua keperluan pembangunan, baik untuk pelayanan publik, untuk demokratisasi pemilu, pemilihan presiden, pemilihan bupati wali kota, kemudian perencanaan pembangunan, untuk membagi anggaran, termasuk untuk penegakan hukum dan pencegahan kriminal. Kita bangun ekosistemnya, sehingga semua pihak merasa berkepentingan dan bisa mendapatkan manfaat dengan data itu. Tentu ini membutuhkan tahapan-tahapan karena pertumbuhan masyarakat di Indonesia tidak bisa bergerak sama. Kita ada Papua, ada Maluku, tetapi juga ada Jakarta, Surabaya, Medan, dan seterusnya. Penduduknya sangat besar, geografinya juga sangat luas. Nah, tentu di sini kita bisa menggunakan dua pendekatan. Pendekatan online dan pendekatan manual. Yang mana yang bisa kita lakukan secara bertahap nanti semuanya menuju layanan online dan digital. Nah, yang layanan digital ini kita bisa mulai bergerak menggunakan fingerprint, menggunakan digital signature, dan menggunakan face recognition sebagai sarana autentikasi dan verifikasi. Itu Bu Leslie.
Thank you so much, Professor Zudan. Perhaps I'd like to hear a little bit more about Menpan Arbe that has endeavored a lot of coordination at national and subnational level, given its role as the coordinator of e-government. Ibu Rini, how is your experience managing this coordination, and specifically, what have been the key achievements and challenges that you face?
Jadi pertama memang sebelum kita mengeluarkan kebijakan mengenai SPB ini, kita melakukan penilaian dahulu mengenai kematangan indeks SPBE atau kematangan penggunaan SPBE di pemerintah daerah begitu. Kenapa ini kita perlukan? Karena saya ingin melihat seberapa besar sih perbedaan antar instansi pusat maupun daerah ya, atau dari instansi seluruh instansi itu, bagaimana mereka aware terhadap transformasi digital. Ternyata memang hasilnya untuk pemerintah pusat memang cukup tinggi ya, tetapi untuk pemerintah daerah gapnya itu lumayan jauh gitu antara provinsi maupun kabupaten, bahkan kabupaten ada yang sangat-sangat rendah. Nah, inilah yang menurut saya menjadi salah satu faktor yang bagaimana cara kita mengkoordinasikan kebijakan-kebijakan di dalam pelaksanaan SPB ini, karena pada prinsipnya SPB ini perlu ada satu keterpaduan di dalam pelaksanaannya. Salah satu berikutnya adalah di Indonesia itu memang agak berbeda sistemnya dengan negara lain, Singapura misalnya contohnya. Di kita itu fungsi-fungsi kebijakan di dalam transformasi digital itu tidak hanya melekat pada Kemenpan RB, tapi melekat pada kementerian dan lembaga yang lainnya. Sehingga ini yang menyebabkan salah satunya kita membangun tim koordinasi SPBE supaya terjadi koordinasi di dalam setiap kebijakan. Nah, pada saat yang bersamaan kita juga membangun sistem atau aplikasi-aplikasi umum yang berbagi pakai, sehingga instansi pemerintah di pemerintah daerah yang saat ini masih memerlukan atau belum mampu untuk membangun sistem SPBE yang sebagaimana pemerintah dan lembaga yang lainnya, maka kita meminta mereka untuk menggunakan aplikasi-aplikasi umum. Nah, aplikasi-aplikasi umum yang sekarang sudah dibangun itu tentu saja kita berharap bisa mengurangi kesulitan dari pemerintah daerah di dalam melaksanakan transformasi digital di pemerintah daerah. Memang Bu Leslie belum banyak ya, baru sekitar tiga aplikasi umum, tapi secara umum di Indonesia itu ada sekitar 23.000 aplikasi nih yang ada begitu ya, yang perlu kita lakukan penyederhanaan, dan kita mendorong supaya setiap instansi pemerintah bisa menggunakan aplikasi berbagi pakai. Nah, saat ini tentu saja kita sudah membagi peran antara kementerian dan lembaga. Menpan berperan sebagai apa, Kominfo berperan sebagai apa, dan saya rasa ada peran Kementerian Dalam Negeri sebagai pembina dari pemerintah daerah untuk juga mendorong penggunaan atau transformasi di bidang IT ini dilakukan. Dan sebagai informasi juga saat ini Kemenpan RB sedang membangun enterprise arsitektur atau arsitektur SPBE nasional. Itu kita harapkan bisa menjadi kerangka struktur untuk bagaimana kita mengintegrasikan sistem dan tata kelola baik pusat maupun di pemerintah daerah. Demikian Bu Leslie.
Great, thank you so much. Now, turning over to Pak Setiaji, I'd like to learn from you during the COVID crisis management. Could you tell us about the benefits of digital government transformation? What are the key lessons learned from addressing different data systems in the pandemic response? And what are the conditions to build back better interoperability and data sharing across agencies for future readiness and resiliency?
Oke, terima kasih Bu Leslie. Ya, begitu kami membentuk tim DTO ini, jadi kami mendapatkan 2 agenda besar ya terhadap tim tersebut. Pertama adalah bagaimana kita bisa mengatasi pandemi COVID ini dengan digital. Terus kemudian yang berikutnya lagi adalah agenda yang lebih besar lagi adalah melakukan transformasi untuk sistem kesehatan nasional. Nah, tim ini tentunya karena di setup lebih strategik ya, langsung under Pak Ministry, dan kemudian juga cross cutting serta sifatnya lebih agile baik dari sisi development maupun juga untuk pengembangan sistem dan sebagainya. Nah, beberapa hal yang bisa kita lakukan dengan ada tim ini adalah mengatasi blocker ya, beberapa blocker yang dihadapi sebelumnya dan yang biasanya memberikan pagar, tapi kita memberikan solusi. Oh, tidak bisa seperti ini, tapi kita punya way out yang lain. Nah, kemudian tentunya juga kita memiliki digital talent ya, yang salah satu isu di mungkin bukan hanya di kami, tetapi juga di beberapa pemerintahan yang lainnya, yang menguasai new teknologi. Dan kemudian pendekatan-pendekatan baru, seperti misalnya cloud, terus kemudian pembangunan aplikasi yang lebih ke agile development, terus kemudian juga kita juga selalu lebih kepada user centric ya. Jadi kita membangun itu bukan kita bangun aplikasi, tetapi yang kita bangun adalah sebuah produk. Sehingga kita benar-benar memikirkan dari sisi user research, terus kemudian juga kita improve setiap saat karena mendengar user journey dari penggunanya. Nah, kemudian dengan adanya pendekatan-pendekatan seperti itu, sekarang kita bisa lihat bahwa Peduli Lindungi yang saat itu belum menjadi major team ya, major aplikasi maksud saya, tetapi sekarang menjadi super apps yang luar biasa, dan tentunya ini terima kasih juga buat dukungan Pak Prof. Judan ya, yang memberikan akses pendudukan, karena pada saat itu kita bingung kita menggunakan apa untuk dasar vaksinasi, tetapi bersyukur kita sudah memiliki NIC ya sebagai landasan kita untuk mengintegrasikan berbagai macam informasi tadi. Nah, kemudian yang penting lagi adalah aplikasi ini melintasi batasan gitu ya, bahwa bukan aplikasi yang berdiri sendiri, tetapi ini adalah sebuah platform yang terintegrasi dengan berbagai macam sistem yang ada di pemerintahan maupun juga di private sector. Saat ini kurang lebih sudah 50 platform digital yang terintegrasi dengan sistem Peduli Lindungi. Nah, kemudian yang berikutnya terkait dengan bagaimana kita mengatasi conflicting data ya dan sistem ya. Ya memang pada saat pandemi COVID itu banyak sekali daerah-daerah yang melakukan inisiasi untuk mengembangkan sistemnya sendiri untuk menangani COVID. Ya, kita bisa maklum bahwa ini bisa dilakukan karena apa? Karena sistem kesehatan nasional itu belum mature ya di Indonesia dan belum optimal. Karena akhirnya kita membentuk sistem pencatatan sendiri yang bukan berbasis medical record, sehingga menjadikan pain point sendiri bagi kami untuk melakukan integrasi dengan berbagai macam sistem tersebut. Tapi kami punya skema bagaimana mengintegrasikan dengan pemerintah-pemerintah daerah yang membuat sistem-sistem tersendiri, dan kemudian itu kita integrasikan sehingga datanya mengalir dari daerah dan ke pusat dengan seamless, dan kemudian juga dengan sistem-sistem yang lain seperti lab ya dan lain sebagainya, sehingga ribuan lab itu bisa menggunakan dan memanfaatkan API yang terintegrasi. Nah, tentunya ini menjadi PR ke depan ya, bagaimana kita nanti akan membangun interoperability dan data yang baik. Kita saat ini sudah punya Perpres 1 data ya, namun tadi seperti disampaikan belum operasional baru lebih ke strategik. Nah, tentunya harapan ke depan harus kita buat standarisasi. Kalau untuk di Kementerian Kesehatan, yang akan kita luncurkan saat ini, nanti mudah-mudahan di akhir bulan ini adalah electronic medical records yang standar, karena masing-masing rumah sakit, puskesmas, dan lain sebagainya kan sudah memiliki EMR, tapi untuk interoperability-nya tentunya harus kita buat standarisasi, termasuk juga kode referensi. Banyak sekali di awal-awal kami kesulitan untuk mengintegrasikan antar sistem karena yang sederhana saja, kode fasilitas kesehatan saja beda antar sistem. Belum lagi kode layanan, kode obat, dan lain sebagainya. Nah, itu yang akan kita standarisasi, dan sehingga diharapkan nanti ke depan kita memiliki personal health record ya, yang tentunya terintegrasi berkat adanya standarisasi dan kode referensi yang baik. Terima kasih.
Great story. I think this will become a very important case study for many to learn from. So I wish you luck on this journey forward at the Ministry of Health. Now, I wanted to ask Ibu Shirley about the role and the role of private sector and how you could benefit from the digital government transformation, and what are the biggest examples of this? And what role can private sector contribute in this public and private partnership model?
Thank you, Leslie. So I guess there are basically two key things that the private sector can do. I think the first one that Pak Setiaji mentioned, I think this whole facilitation of data exchange within the government agency, but also the industry would be very key. So having the industry as part of this a digital platform would be very important. Jadi, if we take whether it's a digital health, digital education platform, digital manufacturing platform, so having the private sector as part of that platform to join with the government to make, for example, the e-medical record system much more efficient, or having the telemedicine aspect joined into that digital health platform would be very key. Similarly, in the education side, the government of Indonesia has already started with the education platform linking all the public school, but if you can link the education system, so you can have a customized LMS, you can link the different teachers with students, schools, so that can provide personalized learning. This can become a lot more powerful. Similarly, on the digital manufacturing, for example, now the Ministry of Industry has already started with an index on the readiness of the manufacturing companies to adopt 4.0. But if this can also then be tied with how can the players, the private players, help this SME to become a lot more ready. So having that players also as part of the platform, like what, for example, EU has done, then this can become a lot more powerful. And finally, if you can integrate this with this whole digital government platform as one holistic national digital platform, I think that would be very, very powerful. So I think that's number one. And number two, I think the other big thing yang private player juga bisa bikin adalah to help the government to develop dari sisi infrastructure, and also help the government to be the thought partner untuk provide that digital services as well for the sectors as well, because they know what they need. So if they can partner with the government untuk be able to provide those digital services, whether it's on e-health, whether it's on e-education, e-welfare, e-mobility, where citizen can take the multimodal transportation and so on and so forth, then this will become a lot more powerful. And it can really help to improve the quality of the services for the citizens. So at the other hand, it can also help to alleviate the burden, on the ICT spend for the government as well. So those would be the two big areas where I believe the private players can play a big role.
Thank you so much, Ibu Shirley. Now we're running out of time, unfortunately, to take questions from the audience. So in the interest of trying to wrap things up, we'll make sure that we'll email the response to the audience who submitted the questions. So I wanted to close today's very engaging conversation with one question for all of you. If you could take less than a minute for everyone to respond on what is the 1 or 2 actions you plan to do to support Indonesia's digital government transformation? Shall we let the lady start first this time? Starting with Ibu Rini.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Leslie ya. Jadi saya kira kalau yang paling utama perlu kita kerjakan saat ini adalah Indonesia itu harus punya government enterprise arsitektur gitu, atau arsitektur SPBE nasional. Saat ini sekarang kita sedang menyusun ya, karena dengan adanya government enterprise arsitektur ini sehingga kita bisa dapat lebih memastikan transformasi digital itu menjadi lebih terarah gitu. Kita saat ini sudah terlalu silo ya, terlalu banyak sekali tadi saya sampaikan sampai lebih dari 23.000 aplikasi, semuanya tidak saling terhubung. Karena ini bukan sekedar, sekali lagi bukan sekedar aplikasi di dalam arsitektur enterprise itu, termasuk juga bagaimana tata kelola pemerintahan yang harus kita bangun, karena kita punya 47 urusan pemerintah, sekian ratus sub urusan pemerintahan yang tentu saja tadi sangat complicated kalau dari Singapura tadi ya. Nah, dengan adanya government enterprise arsitektur, saya kira bisa lebih mendorong digital transformation di Indonesia. Dan dengan adanya digital AI ini, mudah-mudahan lebih banyak lagi inisiatif strategis yang bisa dikawal dan dipastikan supaya lebih terarah. Demikian Bu Leslie dari saya.
Thank you so much, Ibu Rini. Now over to Ibu Shirley, please.
Thank you, Leslie. Jadi kita sebagai company sudah sangat aktif ya, becoming a thought leadership for the government to support Indonesia's overall digital ambition. Whether waktu itu bantu Kementerian Industri for Making Indonesia 4.0, kita juga bantu Bappenas in its digital economic roadmap. We help also to think through on the Indonesian education roadmap and how we can leverage digital to help to provide a more inclusive education. So I think as a firm kita we are committed untuk continue untuk memberikan thought leadership, and we'll be happy to help even any of our panelists to think through how can we provide that thought leadership and also bring best practices from other countries to help the Indonesian government to accelerate its digital transformation ambition. Thank you, Leslie.
Great. Thank you so much. Over to you, Pak Setiati.
Ya, terima kasih. Ada beberapa hal tentunya yang selain melanjutkan transformasi digital terkait dengan penanganan pandemi COVID ini, kita juga akan mendorong dari sisi sektor kesehatan untuk melakukan integrasi dengan sektor-sektor yang lain ya. Seperti saat ini dengan Kemendikbud, kami bekerjasama dengan Govtek-nya untuk melakukan semacam inisiasi untuk sekolah aman, dan kemudian saat ini juga dengan Kementerian Agama untuk mendorong supaya umroh dan haji terintegrasi dengan sistem kita juga, dan tentunya dengan sistem-sistem yang lain. Karena kesehatan ini merupakan bagian penting untuk bisa diintegrasikan dengan sistem yang lain seperti lingkungan, terus kemudian ekonomi, dan lain sebagainya. Dan juga yang tidak kalah pentingnya lagi adalah ekosistem. Kita harapkannya ekosistem bukan hanya kesehatan, tetapi juga ekosistem khususnya Govtek ini bisa terus berkembang. Nah, kita harapkan kita buat semacam inisiasi Govtek Indonesia ataupun community ya, yang sekarang kan perkumpulannya itu sendiri-sendiri, ada perkumpulan Dinas Kominfo, ada perkumpulan Pusdatin masing-masing kementerian. Nah, itu harusnya kita coba satukan sehingga nanti bisa jadi best practice lesson learn lah, masing-masing institusi seperti apa mengembangkannya dan lain sebagainya. Kita harapkan dengan ekosistem yang kuat ini bisa mulai mengimprove beberapa sisi-sisi integrasi dan lain sebagainya.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I would like to hand it over to Professor Zudan to share with us your closing remark, please.
Ya, terima kasih Ibu Leslie. Sebelumnya saya juga ingin mengucapkan terima kasih terakhir kepada Ibu Bolorma Amgabazar, Pak Joho, dan juga Pak Jonathan Marskell. Dan saya ingin melengkapi yang disampaikan Bu Rini dan Mas Setiaji tadi. Pertama yang harus kita lakukan dalam kerangka lebih masif adalah pembangunan human capital, pengembangan sumber daya manusia. Ini perlu diberikan porsi yang sangat besar karena kita sedang bertumbuh. Kemudian yang kedua adalah program berkelanjutan. Tidak boleh ganti pimpinan, programnya kemudian diganti-ganti. Saya mencontohkan di Dukcapil, program yang kita pakai backbone-nya bernama SIA, Sistem Informasi Administrasi Kependudukan. Dan kita bersepakat, negara bersepakat, sejak 2004 sampai sekarang programnya tidak diganti. Kita lakukan improvement terus-menerus. Backbone-nya tetap, tapi dilakukan perbaikan terus-menerus. Kemudian yang ketiga, saya sependapat dengan Mas Tiaji, ekosistem untuk digital government harus kita matangkan. Kita membangun ekosistemnya. Karena nggak cukup hanya platform, tidak cukup aplikasi, tetapi ekosistem sekelilingnya harus kita bangun bersama-sama. Kemudian yang keempat, saatnya kita implementasi satu kebijakan satu data tunggal Indonesia, one data policy. Sekaligus di dalamnya kita mulai mengimplementasikan satu data kependudukan untuk semua keperluan. Dan yang terakhir, integrasi data nasional. Data nasional yang integrated dan connected. Sekaligus bagaimana kita bisa mentransformasi model social security number-nya Amerika dan model extrude-nya Estonia. Ada di situ yang kita sebut dengan integrator data. Nah, untuk data kependudukan bisa kita masukkan sebagai integrator data nasional. Demikian, terima kasih Ibu Leslie. Selamat siang. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Professor Zudan, for the great closing remark. Now, I've learned a lot from all of you today in this panel. Let me just sum up a few key takeaways from my viewpoint. Simplifying government structure and process as well to eliminate any of the complexities, and also enhancing functional competency is very important about rethinking the business process behind the service capabilities. And then also getting into this whole digital talent pool that is so important and is repeatedly mentioned about the critical point where we need more digital talent in government, creating the institutional arrangement. We heard that from Singapore GovTech, and how these are some of the areas where there are various challenges in the current institutional and governance structure that will make it harder for coordinations and compliance aspect. But with the upcoming presidential and ministerial regulations that will hopefully accelerate the transformation alongside better collaboration, for example, the enterprise architecture. We also heard about the Indonesian national identity system is growing and evolving fast, great impressive track record with thousands of organizations already connected for verifications and other purposes. And the ecosystem of stakeholders are going to develop on this platform as well. There are also plans to develop more sophisticated digital identity, especially to further expand the use of national ID card as a single identity number for all public services. So all the best to you in that journey forward. And then from the other aspect, we learn about government through the innovation realm of being able to create that sustainability across administration is very important alongside political will, and being able to bring all the other stakeholders together in this transformation journey, similar to what Singapore GovTech has done over the years since 2014. And then agile government ecosystem, the modern ways of working in digital era, public cloud, user research and user centricity, modern technologies, collaboration tools, and across building the ecosystem is very important between public and private sector collaborating together. And the need to integrate across different ministries, great lessons learned as well from the other agencies. And finally, about the data and standards, we heard about importance of having these kind of the data standard in order to create better use, such as electronic medical record. And that is such a game changer, especially coming out from COVID recovery. And then we hear from private sector in the importance of the role that private sector can play to really help drive greater transformation across different sectors, digital health, education, manufacturing, SME, integration in this platform, and how this can all come together with government services and in creating an inclusive growth that is so important for Indonesia on the path forward. I wish you all the best in this journey. And I believe that with all the great the coordinations and collaboration across public sector and private sector, that there will be a bright future ahead. Thank you so much for your great wisdom today. And thank you very much to the audience for the great participation, for staying the entire time. Apologies for running over, but it's such an engaging conversation. I hope to see you in Indonesia. Terima kasih. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Ibu Leslie, for leaving us with that optimistic remarks, but it's also urging us to take all the significant steps forward, drawing from the insights we hear this morning and from the bank's recommendation. I would like to thank Prof. Sudan, Ibu Rini, Pak Setiaji, Ibu Shirley for your invaluable insights, and again to Ibu Leslie and Bapak Jonathan for moderating and presenting us with the key insights and takeaways from today's discussion. And of course, I would like to thank you, our esteemed guest, for your great participation and excitement this morning. We are extremely hopeful that our conversation contributed to our shared understanding and on the challenges and complexities, but also on how we could leverage whole of government approach to reduce fragmentation, develop national digital identity framework, and adopt whole of government approach to data management and integration to build the foundations of digital government in Indonesia for the benefits of Indonesian citizens. This webinar is second in the Beyond Unicorns webinar series. Our last series on digital connectivity is coming up soon. Meanwhile, if you want to rewatch this webinar and in our previous session on digital economy, the recordings are left available from our Facebook page at Bank Dunia. Finally, we would like to request that you fill out the feedback form available in the chat box. And we also encourage you to once again download and use in your conversation the full report, Beyond Unicorns, Harnessing Digital Technologies for Inclusion in Indonesia, by scanning the QR code available on the screen or from the website worldbank.org/digital Indonesia. Appreciate you being with us this morning. My name is Biondi Sima, and on behalf of the World Bank team and everyone involved in this program, we thank you once again, and we are looking forward to hosting you in our next World Bank event. See you then, stay safe, enjoy the rest of the day. Sampai jumpa semuanya. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Terima kasih.
Thank you, Ibu.
Terima kasih.
Thank you. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih.
Ibu Dorma, Ibu Shirley, Ibu Dini, Ibu Leslie, Mas Yaji, Jonathan.
Terima kasih.
Thank you semuanya.
Thank you.